Thank you for joining us for this sermon podcast from United Church on the Green, located in New Haven, Connecticut. No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are invited and welcome. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to learn more about our open and affirming ministry at United Church on the Green, please visit our website at unitednewhaven.org. Thank you.
Will you pray with me, please? Oh, dear God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our Redeemer. Amen. The passage from Isaiah that was read earlier, as well as just sung by our choirs, is often a very familiar passage that we hear and read so often for Advent. Advent, our time of preparation and waiting and anticipating the birth of the baby Jesus. I hope now that we will have ears to hear, that we might hear this with a new sound and a new reverence and a good, exciting anticipation. For this passage comes from a long time ago, round about the 8th century before Christ was even born. But it is a passage that we read, and it has meaning for us at all times. May we hear it now with a fresh sound. You know, at that time, Isaiah the prophet was wrestling with the kings of Judah and facing an ever-encroaching Assyrian colossus. It sounds as if the prophet is probably pretty well fed up with the pathetic attempts at leadership that he was witnessing. The king and his court in Jerusalem were not doing a job of bringing about peace. But rather, it was a very ineffective and almost horrific time for them. And so this prophet began to dream. And he began to dream of something far better and imagined that God had something much more positive that would come out of this very negative time. This follows a chapter in which the prophet is warning that God is going to cut down all the trees. And this was a metaphor of a clearing out or a clean sweep, so to speak. And there would only be a stump that will remain. As Catherine Huey explains this, as a result of God's sweeping movement across the land, it also is not a very pretty picture. The stump appears beyond life and hope. But we know that clear cutting does look ugly, but it was certainly a very powerful way for the prophet to get the people's attention. As I said, the political time at that time was pretty horrendous and in total disarray. Then, just when things appear to be the very worst, Isaiah holds out something that we all want to grasp onto, and that is, he passes out hope for all of us. Into the setting when everything is beginning to appear hopeless and the future looks incredibly blank, the prophet promises that God will send a king from the great and glorious line of Jesse, who will rule with wisdom and with justice toward all and mercy toward the most vulnerable in society. The little ones, the defenseless ones, the innocent ones will be protected and cared for. Powerful words. Isaiah urges the people to remember who they are as the people of God, reminding them that their power and their life comes from goodness and not from greed. So, dear people, I ask you today, what is it during this Advent time that we yearn for in this very bleak time of ours, with a political climate looking very bleak for some people? How are we preparing for just this? Our fear of clean cutting, deportation of illegal immigrants, worries about a lopsided majority election, and our forthcoming anxiety. What is it that a prophet would say to us today as we await the coming of the Christ child this Advent season? Let's start with the image of a shoot growing out of a stump. I've heard that most of the growth from a tree comes from its shoots and from its branches. A shoot shall come out of the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of its roots. Imagine with me now this picture. A tree gets chopped down to a stump, and a little shoot starts growing up out of it at some point on its margins. It's known as a sucker, and to some it is unsightly looking. It's messy and an unwanted nuisance. But Isaiah quite wisely used this little image to speak of something that doesn't want to die, something that is resilient and hardy and life-giving. What a metaphor. Think how Whitney Rice speaks of it. Israel's enemies had tried every way they knew to seal off the stump of Jesse that was the root of the throne of David. War and slavery and imprisonment and starvation. Jesus' ancestors suffered all this and more. There had not been a viable king really on the throne in Israel for generations. And yet somehow there is still life stirring in this burnt-out old stump. You probably have heard about the experiment where a scientist created an ecosystem, a biodome for plants to grow in. And she added a tree and then encased all of it in a bubble. And everything grew well, except the tree. It eventually became bent and it withered. The scientists learned that a tree needs wind to grow. As it pushes back from the wind, the tree becomes strong and mighty. So struggles and storms and hard times are all required for growth. In nature, the wind blows and causes tiny micro cracks. Those micro cracks show up in the trunk and in the branches of trees. And trees rely on this trauma for their growth, standing straight to the wind and breaking a little, but rebuilding at the same time. It is what, as Rice says, helps them grow stronger. So fierce storms might be as pivotal to our growth as the days of sunshine. So from an aged old stump comes a mighty, hopeful shoot, where God gives us new life and new promise and hope. And wind, you see. Wind and resistance and strife and change, sufferings and struggles, hard times. They are all required for growth. Now, as Christians, we can read this passage from Isaiah and see the shoot representing for us Jesus, the foretold Messiah coming from the stump of Jesse, the inheritor of his ancestors. We hear words of hope and words of promise. And we know suffering will come as well as new life, a life of peace and of healing. But as my good friend and theologian Mary Ludy reminds us, it's important to note that this is a Christological fulfillment theology. And in reading this, we must, my friend says, remember and cautions us that it remains a testament of an ongoing tradition, not our own, and thus this text is not ours alone to inherit. We cannot monopolize its meanings. We must never rebuke the Jewish people and their interpretation. Yet we too can read it as words of an idyllic promise. A promise in these times that we need to hear over and over again. Did you hear in reading the beautiful promises of hope and peace? In his book, Peace, Walter Brueggemann at first rejected these words as absolutely unimaginable, precisely because they are so abnormal. Would you agree? And yet Huey reminds us that he can't resist taking a second look, and I challenge you all to do that as well. We need to come to perceive what is truly normal, peace and unity and healing, while the strife and the discord and the suffering that surrounds us are the real abnormalities of life that we have to come and expect and we have lived with. So these are powerful words for this Advent season. We are wrestling in more than one area of life with the meaning of what is normal in politics and in the environment, in the economy, and as we face the challenge of protecting the most vulnerable, those who are often voiceless. In each of them, nation after nation faces division and unrest even after new leaders are put into power. We face a new year feeling especially unsure of what it is that is ahead. It's become normal. For example, to hear about the death toll in Syria, to hear that the last hospital in Aleppo has been destroyed, and to wonder how many more children have been pulled from the rubble, dust-covered and bewildered in their pain. The new normal continues to mean a gauntlet of security measures just to board an airplane. Lawsuits over miracle drugs gone awry. We hear about all kinds of deaths and killings of Black people by white officials. All of this becomes so normal that we forget that we too, as children of God, have been promised better than this. In this Advent season, though, Brueggemann reminds us of the Song of the Promises, the image of the poets, the voices of Moses and the voices of Jesus, that a new world is about to be given, voices given to us, and we can trust ourselves to it and live through it as well. A tiny, vulnerable shoot coming out of an old stump. This is the image we see this Advent season, the fragile spout, a tiny defenseless baby, a humble, small being, rather than a rich, triumphant, and powerful king, which was expected in Isaiah's day, and perhaps it's only been expected today as well. To people in this Advent season of expectation and possibility, can you see the spirit of the coming Christ looking for fertile ground in which to grow? A fresh and welcoming dwelling place? Isaiah proclaims that on the day the root of Jesse shall stand as a signal to the peoples. To the nations shall inquire of him, and his dwelling place will be glorious. How is God drawing up from that stump a hopeful shoot, new life and new promise, new hope in our lives, in our churches, our communities, in our image of a new congregation during these anxious and uncertain times? In Rice's words, let us dedicate ourselves to hosting the coming Christ within us, and we will find ourselves manifesting grace in completely new ways that we never experienced before. Newborn shoots of life growing up to bear good fruit in the best of times and in the worst of times. Dear people, are we ready? Are we ready?
Yes.
Amen.